Good afternoon, everyone. This is Madra. Welcome to the 2017 Emergency Solutions Grant Application webinar. In the room with me is John Cherry, who is handling the webinar. Also, Crystal Stauffer, who helps us helps the homeless team with our invoicing. Stacy Hawthorne is here, who's our ESG program manager, and David Wethington, welcome back, is back with us as of today. He is our HMIS administrator, and Brian Miller is on the phone. So today we're going to try to make this webinar last for approximately 1 hour. All the phone lines are muted and will not be opened for questions. If you have questions during the webinar, as John instructed you earlier, you can use the Q&A box at the top of the screen, or you can use the chat box and submit a question. We'll stop periodically throughout the webinar to answer questions. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted online on the Pennsylvania COC, Balanced State COC website, which is www.pennsylvaniacoc.org, and also on DCED'S website at http://dced.pa.gov/library. The purpose of our application webinar today is to provide an overview of the application process. One of the things that we won't do is go over all of the forms and every detail within the application, but we're going to review some important changes and review some of the allowable activities for the fiscal year 2017 funding. If there is something that we do not go over that you need information on, please be sure to ask a question in the chat box and or contact one of us at the conclusion of the webinar or sometime in the near future prior to the last day that the application is due, which is October 24th. We're also going to provide you an opportunity to ask questions. As I said, Stacy Hawthorne is your primary contact for ESG questions, and her email is listed on the webinar and just in case there's people on the phone and not actually able to see the webinar, her email is shawthorne@pa.gov. So the electronic single application is scheduled to open on October 10th and be open for a 2-week period of time through October 24th. The last opportunity to submit an application will be 5 p.m. on that day. If it is possible, we will try to open the ESA application either later today or early tomorrow, depending on whether or not our customer service is available to open it early. Applications are accepted through the electronic single application, and you must upload all applications into the ESA system. No hard copies of the application will be accepted, so please do not mail any of the application material to us, except please do email a hard copy of the signature page, the resolution, and statement of assurances. And when you mail them, they also must be postmarked by October 24th. Eligible applicants are units of local governments, including cities, boroughs, townships, towns, counties, home rule municipalities, and communities that desire to apply on behalf of other municipalities. Local governments must apply on behalf of nonprofit organizations, which will perform services as a sub-recipient. Nonprofits are not eligible applicants or grantees. And if you look at in the front of the ESG application, we provide definitions of frequently used words to discern the differences between the words that we're using. As far as administration, housing and or redevelopment authorities may not be administrators of the ESG funds unless a competitive bidding process has been completed and documentation of the process is included in the files. The application should indicate if another agency is administering the grant. If this process has already been completed, then submit a copy of that agreement with your application. Eligible activities under the Emergency Solutions Grant include, and they're listed here in order of priority for DCED, rapid rehousing, street outreach, homelessness prevention, emergency shelter, and then there's the HMIS as well as administration. The homeless definition has 4 categories. The first is literally homeless individuals and families. The second is individuals and families who will imminently, which means within 14 days, lose their primary nighttime residence with no subsequent residence, resources, or support networks. Unaccompanied youth or families with children, youth who meet the homeless definition under another federal statute, and 3 additional criteria, which we don't list every criteria here in the webinar, but you can refer to the application as well as the ESG regulations. And then the 4th category is individuals and families fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence with no subsequent residence, resources, or support network. So for fiscal year 2017, the state of Pennsylvania received the ESG allocation of $6,061,665. What we have available for grants is, and I'm breaking this down so that you can see the where this extra money is coming from, because we received an extra pot of funds, but our regular allocation for this fiscal year is slightly lower than it was last year at $5,561,877. We received an additional $499,788 due to funding that was lost in the Eastern COC. HUD would like us to use those funds in the Eastern COC, so we are going to do our best to do that. So once we reduce the amount of funding that we have out of that $6,000, take that $499 as a set aside for the Eastern COC. The total, and we're also reducing by the amount we're using for data collection and administrative funds for DCED as well as our agencies. Then we have an amount of $5,027,252 available. 40% or more of the total available funding will be allocated to services, or I should say to rapid rehousing, not just services within rapid rehousing, but to rapid rehousing. Our planned method of distribution is to the best of our ability, provide 40% of those funds into the Eastern COC, 40% of those funds to the Western COC, and 20% of those funds to entitlement entities. Just for your purposes, I included on this page the information that we received from the intent to apply forms that were submitted. We had 33 applicants. That does not necessarily mean 33 projects. There are additional projects within that. but 33 applicants for a total of $12,705,148. So we have that much request, that much need, but only $5 million, a little over $5 million available. And I thought it was important that you see that, so you'll see the challenge that we have as these applications come in and determining how to allocate the funds. Some restrictions for the use of the ESG. Minimum grant request is $25,000, and that can be $25,000 for a single activity or a combination of activities within ESG. Emergency shelter operation funding requests may not exceed 25% of the total shelter operating costs for the grant period. The grant period is 18 months, so you take 25% of the funds that you would spend on operations during the 18-month period that you would have our grant, and that is the amount that you can request for operations. Successful applicants who do not provide direct services is required to enter into a grant agreement with a third-party recipient. If you receive a grant and you use a third-party recipient, you're still the grantee, who is the entity that enters into a contract with DCED, is still responsible for all contractual obligations, including oversight and monitoring. We recommend that if you're going to use a third-party recipient, you outline in that grant agreement the same requirements that DCED places on you as the grantee to that third-party subrecipient. ESG direct entitlement communities, which is listed in Appendix A of the application, may only apply for rapid rehousing, but we're also going to allow for HMIS and administrative funds to support your administration of the program and to provide us with the data that we need in order to reimburse you for your services. Direct entitlement or non-entitlement communities applying on behalf of subrecipients must identify in their narrative whether the subrecipient receives any amount of the direct entitlement ESG funding for the same activities they are requesting from the state ESG funds. Administrative funds, administrative fund requests may not exceed 3.75% of the total amount of funds requested. Those administrative funds can be used by the applicant who would become the grantee, or those funds can be passed on to any of the subrecipients, or in the case of using a third party for administration, you may pass those funds on to that entity as well. Contracts will not exceed an 18-month period from the date of award. No assistance can be obligated beyond the 18-month contract period with the Commonwealth. Grant funds may only be used for eligible activities outlined in the ESG regulations. I'm going to pause here, and if there are any questions that came through, we can answer them at this time. Oh, yeah. So there is one question, and we're going to answer that. I mean, we can actually answer it now. So the question is, as a direct entitlement community, do we need to submit the LEP compliance form along with our language access plan as part of the application? All applicants must submit that information.
Currently don't see any other questions.
Okay, with there being no further questions, we'll move on. I think what's important to note is that DCED will use our funding to support HUD's core mission, which is to ensure that the most vulnerable populations receive the best outcomes and the highest standards of service. Grantees will be expected to end homelessness for participants quickly and efficiently, participate in the local continuum of care, use the local coordinated entry process when it's available, and use a housing-first approach to providing services. We expect all of the grantees to coordinate with the local continuum of care, support all of the continuum of care activities, and the COCs will also provide feedback on whether or not the entities applying are participating within the continuum of care. And I want to really convey that with this funding, DCED is using this funding to support the efforts and the priorities as established by the COCs. Applicants are expected to address the federal priorities in opening doors, which is the federal plan to prevent and end homelessness. And if you look in the application, there's more information about that. But the goals are to end veteran homelessness, chronic homelessness, families, youth, and children, and all homelessness, and there are dates set within there. We continue to, and there are some communities within Pennsylvania who have already ended veteran homelessness and chronic homelessness. We continue to work at the balance of state on veteran homelessness and chronic, and so our priorities are to support this federal plan and get to the point where Pennsylvania is able to declare that we have ended homelessness in these areas. We expect you to use a housing-first approach, which is to provide permanent housing immediately and with few to no preconditions, behavioral contingencies, or barriers. Housing First, there was Housing First training provided by the Continuums of Care within the balance of state in the spring of 2017, and we anticipate providing some additional training at some point in 2018. So as far as the activities within ESG, we outlined some of DCED's priorities and labeled them as primary, secondary, and non-priorities. Our primary priority, as it has always been and will continue to be until we end or get as close as possible to ending homelessness, is rapid rehousing. We want to ensure that we're getting people off the street as quickly as possible. And at some point in time in the future, our priorities may shift, and maybe homelessness prevention will be the primary priority. But right now it is rapid rehousing. Our secondary priorities are street outreach, homelessness prevention, and emergency shelter. A non-priority is emergency shelter operations. That is not to say that we are not funding operations within a shelter. I don't want anyone to get confused with that. You may still apply for emergency shelter operations. In the application, we identified some targeted activities for this funding round. Street outreach, which is limited to the balance of state COCs who participated in the 2017 point in time, and identify homeless individuals and families that are not housed or sheltered. Eligible activities, which is on page 6 of the application, include engagement, case management, emergency health and mental health services, transportation, and services to special populations. And David Wethington is going to give you some more detailed information as to what specific activities are eligible under this component.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To focus more on the street outreach component, and this, for focus a little, and if you want to read a little bit more, it can be found in 24 CFR 576.101, where services delivered for on the street to persons living unsheltered. A little bit more detail to engagement is activities that involve locating, identifying, and building relationships with the unsheltered homeless individuals while connecting that homeless person to homeless assistance programs and other mainstream resources. Case management is assessing housing and service needs and arranging, coordinating, and monitoring the delivery of individualized services. And then you have your emergency health services that involves the direct outpatient treatment of medical conditions by a licensed medical professional in community-based settings, such as your streets, your parks, your campgrounds, to those eligible participants for whom other appropriate health services are not available to them or inaccessible to them within the area of where they're at. And emergency mental health services is similar to emergency health services, except this is for the direct outpatient treatment for of those with mental health conditions assessed by a licensed health professional that don't have access or inaccessible to getting those services in the area where they're at. And then transportation, which is travel by outreach workers, social workers, medical professionals, or other service providers during the provisions of eligible street outreach services. And then your services to special populations, otherwise eligible essential services, like what was just mentioned, like what I just mentioned, that have been tailored to address the special needs for homeless youth, victims of domestic violence, and related crimes and threats, and or people living with HIV/AIDS who are literally homeless.
Yeah, and again, it's important to note that these are services that are delivered to persons who are literally on the street, living unsheltered. The second targeted activity under this funding round is the housing locator services, which are activities necessary to assist program participants in locating, obtaining, and retaining suitable permanent housing and increasing housing stability and self-sufficiency. Stacey Hawthorne is going to provide you with a little more information as to the specifics of the activities for that.
Thank you. Housing locator services, these are services specifically or under rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention. So housing search and placement, assessment of housing barriers, needs, and preferences, development of an action plan for locating housing, housing search and research to in negotiation with an owner, assistance with submitting rental applications and understanding leases, assessment of housing for compliance with ESG requirements for habitability, lead-based paint, and rent reasonableness, and assistance with obtaining utilities and making moving arrangements and tenant counseling. Under housing stability case management, assessing, arranging, coordinating, monitoring the delivery of individualized services to facilitate housing stability. That would be using the centralized or coordinated assessment system to conduct the initial evaluation and reevaluation. You have counseling, developing, securing, and coordinating services, including federal, state, and local benefits, monitoring and evaluating program participant progress, providing information and referral to other providers, developing an individualized housing and service plan, and assistance cannot exceed 30 days during the period that the program participant is seeking permanent housing and cannot exceed 24 months during the period the program participant is living in permanent housing.
Thank you, Stacey. So again, this is designed specifically to assist with the coordinated entry, and also it falls under services category of rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention. Other information that you need to know is that agencies should not submit for funding in anticipation of future need, but for actual immediate need to address current issues of homelessness or near homelessness in your community. Grantees will be expected to match 100% of their grant award unless provided a match waiver. The specifics regarding the match are outlined in the application. If anyone needs additional assistance with match, we are available and willing to help you either understand the match requirements a little better or help you identify different areas or different ways that you can obtain match. Also, we are encouraging regional projects in this funding round, but the project must address a statewide need, and it could be within the COC, and be supported by data. All grantees will be assessed a risk level upon review of application, and if awarded, they will be monitored during the course of the contract. Grantees assessed as high risk will receive technical assistance during the first year of award and will receive an on-site monitoring. Grantees assessed as moderate risk will receive technical assistance and may receive either an on-site monitoring or a desk audit as warranted, and low-risk grantees may receive a desk audit. There's a reporting requirement. Grantees will be expected to highlight and include success stories with the fiscal status report submitted at the 1-year mark and at the closeout of the contract. The success stories are submitted within HMIS, and once you submit your success story, then the system will open up the fiscal status report for you to submit, as well as the closeout report at the end of the contract period. Documentation of homelessness is very important. If you're granted funds, we have a webinar which was previously recorded on our federal resource library on DCED'S website that you can review. Also, we are willing to provide technical assistance for any agencies that may need additional information on documentation of homelessness, but the requirements include written documentation that is collected at intake, and you must verify homeless status. Priority for obtaining evidence includes, in this order, third-party documentation, including written and source documentation in HMIS records, intake worker observations, and certifications from persons seeking assistance. That's the last that you should do. And if you use certification self-declared, you have to document your efforts to obtain the third-party documentation as well as the intake worker observations first. If funded, this information must be submitted with every invoice where you require reimbursement under rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention. Emergency shelters must provide proof of clients served. The forms supporting documentation requirements are to be submitted to DCED. The next form is just a copy of our documentation of homelessness form that we have in our HMIS system. Sorry if you cannot see it clearly, but no worries, because if you're funded, you'll have a clear copy within the system. But this is just to give you an overview of what you need. Some conditions for funding is the limited English proficiency, which includes Section 601 of the Title VI, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Executive Order 13166. Grantees, all grantees are required to make reasonable efforts to provide language assistance and meaningful access for LEP persons, which includes a 4-factor analysis and the language access plan, which must be signed by the chief elected official. All applicants must provide a statement of need. The statement provides a need-based and data-informed narrative with detailed explanation of homelessness in the community a description of how the agency will provide a comprehensive range of services, including partnerships with mainstream resources and filling gaps in services. The range of services is not necessarily that you are applying for each component of ESG. The range of services is how you're identifying the needs of each client and ensuring that you have services available to help this client be successful and sustain themselves in a permanent housing situation. Non-balanced estate applicants must include a copy of their performance measures with the application. And all program design forms, which we'll get to later, must indicate how the agency will meet the needs of the community as outlined in the needs statement. Grantees will submit homeless data into an HMIS or comparable database for DB providers. Housing First, you must use this approach when providing services. And then solicitation of participants, and participants again is the clients that you serve, but is identified in definition in the beginning of the application. You have to notify the community of available services with your priority populations identified that you are going to provide services to. So each applicant has to identify within their application how you are going to notify your community that you're providing services. And we have some examples in the application. You can use Facebook, you can use your website, your county website, you can put stuff in the newspaper. You have to notify the community that you have services, homeless services available for their use. As far as the residency requirement, applicants must not place a residency requirement on participants in order to receive services. Program design forms, which we'll go over at the end of the presentation, but you have to submit one for each subrecipient that will provide services. And there's one for each activity. All ESG-funded recipients are required to participate in the annual point in time, and you have to provide a timeline of activities to be completed. That could include helping to organize volunteers. That could include reaching out to shelters to help get a count, also collecting donations. It's a variety of ways that you can help with the point in time that does not necessarily involve you going out and actually doing the count. So I just want to be clear that we're not asking anyone to be in violation or to have some liability concerns. We're asking you to participate in the point in time and help get the numbers so that we can provide adequate services across Pennsylvania. Okay. Some other conditions for funding include rent reasonableness and fair market rent must be done for each client served. If you're providing rental assistance, you must develop and implement standards to ensure compliance. Additionally, all federal requirements must be met in 24 CFR 576, which are also outlined in the application. I wanted to just point out a couple, well, 5, that are extremely important, which are fair housing, equal access, the prohibition against involuntary family separation, single-sex shelters, and ADA compliance. For fair housing, no person shall be discriminated against, and programs and activities shall be administered in a manner to affirmatively further fair housing. Equal access to housing, and the services must be open to all eligible individuals and families regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, or marital status. For the prohibition against involuntary family separation, the age of a child under 18 must not be used as a basis for denying a family's admission to an emergency shelter if the shelter provides services to families with children under 18. Single-sex shelters are allowable under certain conditions, such as serving individuals. Only projects serving individuals may be a single-sex shelter, and then single structure with shared bedrooms or bathroom bathing facilities. The shelter must not be considered a dwelling unit, or it must have a shared bathing facility. Also, ADA compliance. Shelters that receive ESG funds must meet accessibility standards under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Applicants are required to provide written standards, and we outlined that in the application. The written standards can be adopted by or used if the COC has written standards. ESG applicants can adopt those standards for their programs, but the standards will include policies and procedures for evaluating individuals and families' eligibility for ESG assistance, standards for targeting persons experiencing homelessness and providing essential services related to street outreach, policies and procedures for admission, diversion, referral, and discharge by emergency shelters assisted under ESG, including standards regarding length of stay, if any, and safeguards to meet the safety and shelter needs of special populations, including victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault and stalking, and individuals and families who have the highest barriers to housing and are likely to be homeless the longest. Policies and procedures for assessing, prioritizing, and reassessing individuals and families' needs for essential services related to emergency shelter. Policies and procedures for coordination among rapid rehousing assistance providers, homelessness prevention, and emergency shelter providers, other homeless assistance providers, and mainstream service and housing providers listed in 24 CFR 576, 400B and C. Policies and procedures for determining and prioritizing which eligible families and individuals will receive rapid rehousing assistance and homelessness prevention assistance. Standards for determining what percentage or amount of rent and utility costs each program participant must pay when applicable while receiving homeless assistance. Standards for determining how long a particular program participant will be provided with rental assistance and how the amount of that assistance will be adjusted over time. Standards for determining the type, amount, and duration of housing stabilization and or relocation services to be provided to a program participant, including the limits, if any, on the homelessness prevention or rapid rehousing assistance that each program participant may receive, such as the maximum amount of assistance, maximum number of months the program participant may receive assistance, or the maximum number of times the program participant may receive assistance. And finally, the utilization of a limited English proficiency plan. I see there are questions, so we will pause for questions. Okay. Okay.
The first question we have is the entity acting as the applicant required to participate in the COC in addition to their subgrantees, or is the subgrantee participation considered sufficient for participation?
We expect the applicant as well as the sub-recipients to participate in the continuum of care.
The next question we have is, can we revise our project scope from what we declared in the intent to apply form?
Yes, you can revise your project scope from what was in the intent to apply form.
Okay, next question is, am I to understand that a shelter cannot apply for renovation funds for the shelter, specifically making more space available to the shelter for more people?
I'm sorry, ma'am. Can a shelter not apply for renovation funds?
So shelter wants to apply for renovation funds to make more space available for people in the shelter. Is this allowable?
Any applicant can apply for emergency shelter renovation funds.
Okay. Next question we have is, can you clarify the eligible applicants for street outreach? Is it agencies that participated in the unsheltered PIP, and 2, found individuals, families that were unsheltered during that count?
So the eligible applicants for street outreach, obviously the direct entitlements cannot apply for street outreach. The preference is given to applicants who participated in the point-in-time count. Obviously, if you found no one out there and you know that there's no homeless people on the street, then I'm not really sure why you would apply for street outreach funds. However, any entity within the balance of state may apply for street outreach. Preference will be given to entities that apply who actually found homeless people while they were doing the point-in-time count.
Okay. The next question we have is, will you elaborate somewhat on the renovation as a funded component?
Okay, so I'm not really sure what that question is what you're trying to get at with that question, but renovation falls under emergency shelter. At the beginning of the presentation, we outlined all the activities. And then we outlined priority activities, secondary priority activities, and emergency shelter was one of those activities. Renovation, as well as essential services, as well as operations, fall under emergency shelter. So, yes, renovation is an eligible activity and can be applied for in this funding realm. We have not prioritized it, therefore we're not talking about it very much, but it is still an eligible activity, and additional information about eligibility and priority funding opportunities is listed in the application. And the priority for funding any type of renovation will be for code deficiencies, ADA compliance, energy conservation, health and safety issues, and increase in bed capacity. You can find that on page 7 of the 2017 program guidelines and application kit. I hope that answered the question.
Okay. The next question is, can you tell me how far in advance you must post in the local newspaper that a hearing is being held for DCED funding grantees?
Okay, I'm not sure if this is if you're referring to the solicitation of subrecipients, or if you're referring to that you are applying for funding to DCED. I mean, as long as you identify the year that you're applying for, if it's for funding from DCED, you can do it as soon as you are aware that there's going to be a funding opportunity available. If it's for solicitation of subrecipients, that's totally up to you. I know some entities will put it in the paper that they're going to apply to us for funding maybe 6 months in advance so that they have an idea of who's going to request that they apply on their behalf and what kind of services are needed. So it really depends on the situation. There is no time frame per se, but you definitely have to post it in the paper.
Okay, next question is, what forms of documentation for shelter services should be provided, and should they be provided with each invoice?
In the invoice, when you're submitting your invoice to shelter, if it's for operations, it would be, if you're submitting for a utility bill, you would have to provide that bill. If you are submitting for an employee under operations, you must provide the employee, their position, the salary, the hourly rate, times how much how many hours they worked. Same as central services in there. Those are the type of things you would have to provide for in an invoice for shelter services. It all depends. Again, operations would be utility bills. If you're for rent, you would have to provide the lease, a copy of the lease. And if there's an employee, an example would be like a night worker or something like that, you would have to provide the time that you're billing for, person's name, position, title, work title, and his rate, his or her rate, times the hours that you're submitting.
Yeah, the only other thing that I can think of to add on to that is if you have a contract with maybe like a cleaning service of some sort, and you have to provide a copy of that contract, and that you bid for services to employ that that company.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next question is, are the performance measures you're looking for the reports from HMIS or agency-tracked outcomes?
The performance measures, which we'll actually get into later on in the presentation, but those performance measures should be generated from your HMIS, whether that's the balance of state HMIS or your local HMIS or some comparable database, and that will collect that information and then populate it through reporting. So yes, it should come from your either HMIS or your comparable database.
Okay. Next question. It appeared in the application that the grantee, i.e. the county, needed to have a set of written guidelines and that all sub-grantees needed to agree to operate under those guidelines. These were not each separate sub-grantee. The requirements needed to be at least what was listed in Appendix B. Is this correct?
That is correct. So what's listed in Appendix B need to be developed by the applicant, and any subrecipient operating under that applicant need to follow those standards. And again, we said before, those written standards can be adopted by what is already in place by the continuum of care.
Okay. Next question we have is, in addition to submitting a hard copy of the resolution, statement of assurances, and signature page, do we need to submit anything to our regional office?
You do not need to submit anything to the regional office. Just ensure that those pages are submitted to us, hard copy, live signatures, as well as upload those into the ESA system with your application.
Okay, next question we have is, with the coordinated entry beginning in January, must we utilize a chronic homeless list with this grant?
Not sure what the chronic homeless list is that they're referring to. If the person who asked that question want to be more specific.
That would be Sandy. Sandy, if you want to follow up, just type in the Q&A or chat. We'll move on to the next question now. How do participants in homeless temporary transitional housing projects fit the homeless definition for ESG? Would those be transitional, be able to be assisted with RRH services and rental assistance?
So for transitional housing projects, the only projects that are allowed to be funded under ESG are those that were funded and grandfathered in 2010. So fiscal year 2010, if you received any type of transitional housing assistance under the ESG program, then we are allowed to fund you. If you did not receive any assistance under ESG, we cannot fund the program.
Okay. And our next question is, homelessness documentation is currently uploaded into HMIS. Will this documentation for each participant being assisted also have to be hard copied with invoice documents for rental assistance and financial assistance?
No, you have to have it submitted, uploaded in HMIS, because I believe it won't let you move forward without you submitting that form, that documentation. So no, you don't have to. Some grantees do, but as long as it's uploaded in HMIS, that form, proof of documentation of homelessness, no, you don't have to submit a hard copy with the invoice.
Just to add to that, so if you're a grantee or a sub-grantee that is using PA-HMIS, you have the ability, as you're enrolling your clients into the programs, it is required that the documentation be uploaded during that enrollment. If you are not using PA-HMIS and you are using some other comparable database, then you would need to upload a hard copy into the invoicing process.
So I just want to go back. You have another question?
Just follow up on the earlier question.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. Going back to the earlier question with coordinated entry beginning in January, must we utilize the chronic homelessness list with this grant? Just to follow up to that question is, when homeless persons come through our doors, they answer a series of questions and receive a score. If applicable, they are placed on the chronic homeless prioritization list within the COC. Must we refer to this list prior to offering rental assistance?
If your coordinated entry has not begun right away for your region in the balance of states, and the COC has chosen to go through some type of community queue or some type of prioritization wait list, if it's not being utilized at the time, it wouldn't be required as you're submitting. But if your COC is using this list and that's how you are bringing clients into the system through the prioritization list, then it is a good idea to include that in the application.
Okay. And that appears all the questions that we have.
So moving on to performance measures and goals. Applicants must write targets for each goal, and this includes how many households it intends to serve in each category of street outreach, emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, and homelessness prevention. So as far as the performance targets, this is for the contract period that you'll be entering into, and the entitlement entities will have to use our form because we don't have access to your information. Our balance of state entities and any other entitlement entity that report into the state HMIS will be able to upload this information into our HMIS for us to track it during the course of the contract. So this form shows you the performance measures that are being used by our balance of state COC. And we would like each applicant to fill this out as an overall for all, not to submit multiple forms, but overall for your project, what are your target numbers, your overall target numbers. In addition to that, we would like to see your performance outcomes from previous years for the same activities in addition to mainstream resources. So we're just showing you what the forms look like in the application. And these forms are actually, John Cherry made these forms fillable for us, so they are available as fillable forms so that you don't have to try to print and retype. The next form is a form we use within the balance of state COCs. The balance of state leadership will submit a form for all applicants that are applying for funds in the ESG, and they should already be aware because anyone applying should have submitted their intent to apply form to your local COC. We included this just because we modified the form just a little bit, just the verbiage, changed some of the words, but added also the last two boxes, which the first one talks about victim service providers in the coordinated entry system, and then the second one was the intent to apply form, and we want to make sure that each of the COCs actually received it. Okay, so when you submit an application, you want to go to DCED'S website, which is https://www.esa.dced.state.pa.us. You want to log in. If you have already used our system, you should be able to log in with the username and password. And if you have not, then you want to register as a new user. Make sure you put ESG on the application as the funding source. And if you're new to ESA, I would recommend that you click the link on the left side of the page, go to the application walkthrough, and it will help you with any questions you may have regarding submitting your application. If you have any difficulties submitting the application, you have questions about the ESA system, you may submit those questions to our customer service at 1-800-379-7448. They also have a link to an email on the website that you can also submit questions to, and they are very responsive and will help you get your application in. And I will say, please do not wait until the last day to try to submit your application. If you have questions related to the ESG program, you can submit those questions to Stacy Hawthorne, and her number is 717-214-5322. We really recommend email, although I haven't put her email here. It is in an earlier portion of the presentation, and you can probably get a quicker response via email. So when you go into the ESA, you'll see the general application form. You want to make sure you fill out this form. And we're not going to, again, as I stated earlier in the presentation, we're not going to go over every form, just certain things that we think you need to know that's really important that are changes to what we've done before. But just on this general application form, I want to point out, if you can, as the applicant, you will be filling out the top part of the form, but then halfway down the page in that box, it says agency or organization administering the ESG program. Oftentimes that is different than the applicant, so we want to make sure that you put that contact person in that section of this form. The next form is the resolution of the municipality. You want to make sure we have an arrow pointing down to the signature. You have to make sure it is the chief elected official of the applicant that signs, not the executive director or a nonprofit agency or not the person that prepares the application, but the chief elected official. The next page is statement of assurances. Again, you want to make sure that the chief elected official signs this form, and then you want to make sure that the statement of assurances, the resolution, and then the signature page from ESA with live signatures are submitted with the application in ESA, and then the hard copies of those specific forms mailed to DCED. The project budget form, you want to submit one of these budget forms per subrecipient, and then one that combines all of that for the applicant. So one for each subrecipient, and then a cumulative form for the applicant. So the program design forms are a little different than what they were before, but you want to make sure you fill out the top part. You want to have the applicant name and date, and then the project, the program manager's name, et cetera, the project moving forward, where it's going to be located, and then contact information for that person. But also what's different about it is that we removed all of those sections that we had before and just added questions that we want applicants to answer for each of the activities, each of the components under the eligible activities. And so the purpose of removing those boxes was to allow you flexibility with the design of your projects and to ensure that you're able to provide all of the information in a narrative form and make sure that when you do answer these questions, and you'll see for, John, if you could scroll through each of the forms, the rapid rehousing, there's a separate one for street outreach, there's a separate one for homelessness prevention, and then there is a separate one for emergency shelter. And if you fill out one of these for each of the subrecipients that are providing services under your program, and submit this to DCED. I'm going to pause for questions, and we are almost finished.
Just to recap, I'll be emailing this PowerPoint out after the end of this webinar, so just stay tuned to your email. But going on to our first question here, performance targets should include both families or individuals covered by ESG funds and those covered by matched dollars funds, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Are written standards required to be submitted with the application?
Yes, written standards should be submitted with the application.
Okay. Next question is, as an entitlement receiving non-DCED ESG funds, so they're direct entitlements with HUD, when we complete the performance outcomes section of the application, are we reporting on all recipients who receive ESG funds or only those who received assistance with DCED'S ESG funds?
That would just be previous DCED ESG funds that you've received that we want to you'd want to account for.
Performance outcomes.
Okay. Yeah.
Application contents on page 27 of the program guidelines. Subrecipient forms in the last box states subrecipient capacity charts and performance outcomes. Please explain what you're looking for. Just give us 1 second.
Okay, so on page 43 is the capacity chart and the performance outcomes. So we just previously went over the performance outcomes, and that's on page 43, letter D. So I mean, it's the performance that you used ESG funds for previously, the outcomes that you received with our funding. The capacity chart is actually the same chart that we used previously, but you want to list all staff positions, current staff positions and qualifications. We want to see that people who are going to be working on the program have experience and capacity with carrying out the responsibilities of each of the components that are required under the grant.
Okay. Next question we have is it correct that you only want performance outcomes from the most previously funded ESG grants and not from all grant years listed, 2014, 15, 16? And that would be on page 43 of the ESG application package.
Thank you. I wish I would have saw that question before because I was thumbing through this trying to find the capacity chart. But we want all the years that are listed in the application.
And if you didn't have any funding for those years, then you don't list them. But if you have all three, you list all three.
Okay. Next question we have is, if an applicant received rapid rehousing funds in the 2016 ESG application, are they eligible to receive additional rapid rehousing funds in 2017? Since the 2016 can only be used through this upcoming spring, or must they wait to reapply until 2018?
Any applicant who received ESG funds, regardless of it being rapid rehousing or if it was street outreach, you can apply to receive funding during the next funding round. I would just caution that any entity that is having difficulty extending their funding may want to reach out to us for technical assistance and discuss your plans while you're preparing your application.
Okay. Next question we have is, domestic violence shelters do not track the number of households attaining permanent housing and remaining in the unit for more than 3 months. We can track if they return to the shelter within the 3 months.
It's hard to answer this one because there's certain, in order to be compliant with this system performance measures, you have to be able to track the retention or the retention of households or folks that remain in that unit for a certain number of months. We are in the process of working with the victim service providers to get it into a comparable database, and we're working on ways. But as it stands right now, it has to be some type of way of, you'd have to figure out a way to track that information moving forward in order to get that information to be in compliance for reporting.
Okay, moving on to, just want to outline all of the changes so that you have this, and then we'll finish up with questions. So some of the changes that are in the application, which, and some of this may be redundant because we went over it, is grants are 18 months, and the 50% expenditure time is now going to be 9 months from the date of the award. It will no longer be 1 year. Grants are no longer 24 months. Therefore, the 50% expenditure time frame had to be reduced to 9 months. So I would encourage anyone that is funded to ensure that you have everything in place so that when you receive your award letter, you can begin serving clients immediately. Shelter renovations. If you are awarded shelter renovation funds, the signed contracts with the firms that are doing the renovations and conversions or material purchases must be submitted to DCED within the first 6 months of the contract. Work should be completed in 9 months. As for emergency shelter operations, funding requests should not exceed 18 months and no greater than 25% of the total shelter operating budget for the same time period. Grantees are required to participate in the local COC and use the local coordinated entry process. 40% or greater of the funds we have available will be used for rapid rehousing. Written standards must be submitted with the application. DCED is prioritizing our support for the goals of opening doors. We're also expecting agencies to use the Housing First model to providing services. You must submit with your application a statement of need that is data-informed, that includes a data-informed explanation of homelessness in the community. Your community, you have to identify how you're soliciting participants, how you're notifying the community of services that are available for homeless or near homeless people. We are targeting activities of street outreach and housing locator services. All agencies funded with ESG must participate in the point-in-time count each year. Applicants who previously returned funds will receive an automatic 25-point reduction in the scoring of their application. Scoring criteria will continue to be on a 205-point maximum scale with scoring points allocated as follows: 0 for incomplete or no response to the questions, 3 for an acceptable response, and 5 for an excellent response. And if you answer all of the questions without providing, I would just recommend that you answer the questions and not just provide a bunch of fluff, but provide detailed information specific to the question that's being asked, and you shouldn't have a problem. And then lastly, just wanted to point out that we are unable to fund the operation of the coordinated entry system. We will open it up for questions before we end. And again, we are always available to continue to have dialogue about the application while the application period is open. We will provide technical assistance to any entity that is experiencing difficulty with providing the providing responses to the questions, if there's any type of assistance that that we're able to give you without compromising the integrity of the competition. And also, we will let you, if the application opens, as we are going to try to open it no later than tomorrow, then we will post it on Wigio while we still have usage of it. We will post it on the COC website. And if you log into DCED'S website, the application will allow you to go in under ESG. If the application is not open by tomorrow, 5 p.m. tomorrow, then just anticipate that it won't be open until Tuesday, the 10th of October. So, to finalize the questions.
Okay. The first question I have is in soliciting participants as an emergency shelter, we will not be using the queue from the coordinated entry system when bed space is available. Will this not meet this notification requirement?
I'm not sure why you wouldn't use the queue, but we have asked that all applicants work with the local continuum of care in the coordinated entry process. Therefore, the answer to your question would be that if you're not doing that, then you would not be eligible.
Okay, our next question is, if the subgrantee that caused the return of funds for this grant is not in the new grant, does it still cause a 25% decrease in points?
So unfortunately, the sub-recipients are not the grantee. The grantee is the ones that have the responsibility of ensuring that all of the funds that are awarded in the contract are expended during the contract period. So it is the applicant and subsequent grantee who is returning the funds, not the sub-recipient. Therefore, if that same applicant came in for funding in this round, then the applicant would receive a 25-point reduction.
Next question we have is the applicant responsible for the timeliness form, or does each subgrantee write their own?
The applicant is responsible for the timeliness form.
Okay. Next question we have is, can you explain the housing locator services that you referred to earlier?
Okay, I just need a little bit more information about what you need an explanation on. If you can follow up with that question, I can provide you some more detailed information.
Okay, and while we're waiting for that response, the next question is, just double checking, did the webinar open with stating not-for-profits are ineligible for applying?
Did the webinar open with stating not-for-profit? No, we did not say. Okay, so not-for-profit. Nonprofits are not eligible applicants. Nonprofits would have to go through a unit of local government in order to apply under the unit of local government for assistance under the ESG grant.
Okay, next question is, does participation in the queue require identifying information of the homeless individual?
A little, that's participation.
it's a DV provider, then we have to handle that a little differently. I'm not sure if this is a DV provider asking these questions.
Depending on your COC and what rules they have in place for DV or victim service providers of handling those type of clients on a community queue or wait list, you have to relate to that, and you want to include that in the application. So whatever the process is within your continuum of care, that's the one that you want to follow.
Okay. Next question is, if the municipality did not submit the intent to apply, may they still apply regardless?
And if not, why? If the municipality did not submit the intent to apply, you may still apply for funding under this round. Of course, those who did submit the intent to apply will receive priority over those who did not. However, you may still apply and you will still be considered for funding.
Okay. Next question is, does each subrecipient complete the management standards form?
The management standards form is expected to be completed by the applicant. So I'm not sure who asked the question about the housing locator services, needing more information about it, but we were asking for some additional information about what you were looking for. If whomever asked the question, if you want to follow up with us after the webinar or tomorrow, that'll be fine as well. Okay, it looks like there are no additional questions.
One more.
Oh, one more, okay.
Generally speaking, does the applicant provide Section 1 from the checklist and the subgrantee provide the other sections?
The applicant provides all sections of the checklist. I'm sorry for the delay. All information should come from the applicant. How you gather that information from your subrecipients is up to you. The only thing we need is that final application from the applicant who is applying on behalf of themselves or on behalf of any other entity.
There does not appear to be any further questions.
So I want to thank you guys for your participation, and please, by all means, if you have questions or if something was unclear, make sure you reach out to someone, either myself, Stacy, and even David Wethington is available, but primarily Stacy is your contact for ESG, so we would prefer that you reach out to her. And that's SHAWCHORNE@pa.gov. Thank you, and we will get this posted as soon as we can.